Tessie entered the space and asked Arthur to come along with her. Arthur fell to the ground in disappointment because he hated those teleportation gates. She poked him joyfully, telling him they had arrived. Arthur stood up to observe the place. Throughout the entire journey, it was the first time he had seen Tessie genuinely happy. He was stunned by the view before him. Massive fountains stood in the center of the passage, grand mansions were built all around, and flags were placed atop every building. People and guards moved about the area. The gazes of the people around them were strange and fixed on them. Pristine was the only word that came to his mind, and even that failed to do justice to the scene. In front of them, green magical light was swirling. Arthur thought it might be some sort of magical attack and grew furious, ready to draw his dagger. Tessie asked him to stop. A group of soldiers gathered to greet them. They bowed and welcomed back the royal princess. The words left Arthur with his mouth open in confusion. He stood frozen, pointing at the guards, stammering who, where, he or she. Tessie blushed in joyful embarrassment and nodded. One of the soldiers, still bent in respect, informed her that they had arrived as soon as they noticed the royal teleportation gate had been used. The king and queen were worried. A man and a woman in royal attire stepped out of a majestic carriage and rushed toward Tessia. The woman called out that her baby Tessia was okay. The man was Alduin Erlith, king of Eleanor, and the woman was Muriel Erlith, queen of Eleanor. An old man dressed in an elegant royal robe arrived with more soldiers. His name was Virion Erlith, a name recorded in every history book. He was the former king of Eleanor, the one who led the last war against the humans of the Sapin kingdom. Tessie was happy to see all of them, while Arthur remained confused. Virion looked at them in good spirits. Arthur held Tessie in front of him and gently pushed her forward. Muriel bent down and hugged her. The former king savored the smoke from his cigar. The queen and king embraced Tessie together. Arthur's eyes welled up as he observed the reunion. He wondered if his own mother and father would react the same way upon seeing him. Alduin thanked him, not only as the king of Eleanor but also as the father of this little one. As a token of gratitude for helping Tessie return home safely, he asked Arthur to accompany them to their home. His tone was gentle, but his eyes made it clear that this was not a request. It was a command. Arthur bowed respectfully and said it was an honor. Tessia came to his side, radiant with joy, and held on to him. The queen was embarrassed, and the king, the former king, and the guards all watched with puzzled expressions. Tessia pulled him forward and asked him to come along. There was so much she wanted him to see. He had expected a magnificent castle after learning she was a princess, but what he saw surpassed all expectations. Gigantic castles towered over the land, illuminated with beautiful lighting. She kept pushing him forward along the pathway while he took in the atmosphere. He suddenly felt dizzy and paused, thinking to himself what kind of glitched novel he had ended up in. Queen Muriel ordered her handmaidens that the child was their guest and to get him washed and settled into a room to rest. Arthur thanked Queen Muriel but said he would like to explain what had happened first. The queen and king remained silent. The queen sat beside Tessie at the dining table. King Alduin and the former king were also seated. Muriel busied herself braiding Tessie's hair. Guards stood surrounding them. Arthur bowed to introduce himself. He said his name was Arthur Leywin, from a humble town in the kingdom of Sapin, and that it was an honor to be in the presence of the royal family. With eyes closed, he reflected that the introduction may have sounded over the top, but no meaningful conversation would happen if they continued to see him as a mere child. The king remarked that although Arthur claimed to come from humble origins, he seemed rather mature and well-educated. He said he would like to hear what had happened. Arthur began his recount with a vague explanation, stating he had been separated and then encountered bandits. It was not a lie, though not the full truth. As the story moved to the part where he had met their daughter, the mood in the room shifted. When Arthur mentioned the slave traders, King Alduin slammed his fist on the table in anger, blaming the humans. Arthur, speaking humbly, clarified that with all due respect, slave trading was a profession, not a race. King Alduin. The guards immediately drew their swords and pointed them at Arthur, but King Virion ordered them to stand down. Fury was visible in Virion's eyes. He asked Arthur whether he, a child, had watched the slave traders take his granddaughter and what he had done. Negotiated. Arthur replied that no, Elder Virion, while he was a child he was also a mage. He had eliminated the slave traders and rescued the princess. Another guard unsheathed a magical sword and accused Arthur of lying. King Virion turned his ferocious gaze toward the commander, who suddenly realized he had made a mistake. Arthur calmly stated that regardless of whether anyone believed him, Princess Tessia had been returned safely. All he wished for now was to return to his family in Sapin. Tessia stood up, confused, and asked if he was leaving already, calling him Art. King Alduin was baffled to hear her address him that way. Former King Virion appeared slightly suspicious. Arthur responded that, considering their history, he did not think it appropriate for a human to remain in this kingdom for too long, princess. Besides, his priority was to ensure his family was safe and to let them know he was alright as well. King Alduin Erlith began to ponder that regardless of the troubled past between their two kingdoms, Arthur had saved their daughter and had taken the trouble to accompany her all the way back to them, which entitled him to a fitting reward. Tessia grew sad and her mother comforted her gently. King Alduin informed Arthur that, unfortunately, the The teleportation gate connected to the Sapin Kingdom was only accessible once every 7 years, during the summit conference held between the 3 races. It would be another 5 years until the gate would reopen. Arthur was disappointed, but the very next moment he brightened up upon hearing that they would be happy to send a group of guards to escort him back home safely. King Alduin opened his arms wide as a gesture of welcome. He told Arthur that he would also like to extend their hospitality. Some among them were tolerant enough, but many still harbored grudges against humans because of the war long ago, so for now, Arthur should consider himself at home. They would have his escort ready by tomorrow morning. Arthur felt honored and expressed his gratitude. He went into the bathing area and was amazed by the sparkling, beautifully adorned spa. After undressing, he stepped into the shower, thinking that he was far too tired for anything else. As the water poured over him, he enjoyed the bath, but suddenly pain flared through his body, worsening with time. After finishing, he came out and sat down on the couch. He took out an oval-shaped object wrapped in a feather and stared at it. He did not know what to do, and wished Sylvia were there to help him. Someone knocked at the door, and Arthur assured them he was coming. When he opened it, he found Tessia standing there, visibly furious. She struck him in the stomach and pushed him backward. She was upset because, first, he had spoken so coldly to her family, and now he was planning to leave already. Arthur placed his hands on her shoulders to calm her and told her that he had not meant to be cold, only respectful. She knew they were the king and queen of the entire kingdom. He asked why she had not told him. She mocked him in a romantic way. Arthur grew frustrated and told her not to tease him. She burst into tears, crying that she still did not want him to leave. He was the first friend she had ever had. Arthur consoled her by wrapping an arm around her neck and called her a crybaby princess. He then asked her to show him around the castle. They stepped into a vast corridor where she said this was probably her favorite place in the entire castle. Splendid. Glittering flowers were planted along the grass. She said that if he stayed until spring, he could see all the flowers bloom. At least for now he could witness the glow bees harvesting. She picked one up and asked him to look at it, saying it was pretty, right? He was bewildered at the sight of it. She handed the glow bee over to Arthur. Suddenly, a sharp metallic object was hurled toward them. Arthur pulled Tessia down and caught the flying object with his hand. Filled with rage, he dashed forward and began fighting the attacker. In the midst of combat, he realized that it was former King Virion. Virion greeted Arthur, but Arthur remained furious and asked if he had just tried to kill his own granddaughter. Arthur held the object, which turned out to be a dagger. King Virion remarked that it might have left her a small welt, but doubted that the toy Arthur was holding could kill anyone. Upon examining the dagger, Arthur understood that he had been tricked. It was merely a toy or an artificial blade incapable of causing harm. King Virion pointed at him and commended his instincts, noting that Arthur had caught the little present and turned it against him. Though his mana usage was mediocre at best, it was now clear how he had managed to kill a few slave traders. Arthur, worried, thought that the old man might have lost a screw. Tessia pleaded with him to stop teasing Arthur, calling him Grandpa. Virion questioned her teasing. She should know why he had come. It had been a long time since he had met someone interesting. He tossed a sword into the air and declared that they would now see what Arthur was made of, calling him Bart. King Virion swirled the sword skillfully in various directions before suddenly throwing it. Arthur managed to catch it mid-air and instinctively swung it toward King Virion's neck. Tessia, thinking her grandfather had been struck, shrieked in horror. But Virion evaded the attack with ease, chuckling and calling Arthur a scary little brat. Arthur, unsettled by the comment, grew more anxious and launched another strike, only for Virion to dodge effortlessly again. Arthur leaped forward with greater force, determined to land a hit, but all his attempts were in vain. King Virion countered with a powerful blow that sent Arthur flying. Even as Arthur tried to minimize movement and reinforce his strikes with mana, Virion blocked them effortlessly. Frustrated, Arthur couldn't keep up. In one swift motion, King Virion pushed Arthur back again, sending his sword flying. Just as it was about to fall, Arthur caught it mid-air and, with a sudden burst of speed, managed to scratch Virion's forehead slightly. Arthur collapsed onto the ground, exhausted. Tessia rushed over, shouting at them to stop. Embarrassed by the bruise on his forehead, Virion admitted, "It seems I deserve this for being arrogant." But to think he'd actually land a hit. Tessia glared at both of them and pinched her grandfather's skin. "I think you've bullied Art enough, Grandpa," she said firmly. "Oh, that hurts, little one," he shrieked in exaggerated pain. "You should have gone easier on him." "I'm afraid if I had," Virion replied, grinning, "might have been the one bullying me." Arthur laughed out loud. "I'm honored that the esteemed elder Virion thinks so highly of me." Virion narrowed his eyes. "Honored, is it?" he echoed with a strange tone. Arthur's smile faded. "What's with this sudden change in mood? If that's the case," King Virion continued, "become my disciple." Tessia's face turned pale from shock. Virion had already placed a bandage over his scratch using Tessia's personal first aid kit. "So," he asked Arthur, "do you accept?" Arthur replied in an annoyed tone, "You're actually serious? Why wouldn't I be? Well, for one, I'm a human. Is it even allowed for humans to stay in this kingdom?" "No one will dare try and remove you while you're under my tutelage," Virion assured. You're already more talented than most children, and even many adults. But I can teach you things that even the most skilled mages in Sapin couldn't. Arthur crossed his arms. Even if you say that, I can't. Not when I don't even know how my parents are doing. They don't even know whether I'm alive. Virian's tone softened. What if there were a way to find out? To communicate with them and let them know you're safe? Wouldn't that be enough? Arthur hesitated. What do you mean? Wait here. Virian then turned to Tessia. Go get washed up and into bed. He paused, his expression growing serious. I realize I'm being impatient, but this has to do with what I sensed earlier during our little spar. You've been having bouts of searing pain in your manicore, haven't you? And they're becoming more frequent. Arthur's eyes widened. How did you know that? Virian spread his arms. More important than how I knew is the fact that you don't know what's causing it. That's the real problem. He stepped closer. Tell me, do you know what a beast will is? Arthur shook his head. He'd never heard the term before, but his mind immediately flashed to Sylvia and the moment she had struck him at his core. He'd encountered mana beasts before, but not like that. Mana beasts are ranked from Class D up to Class S. Virian explained, but a beast powerful enough to be classified as Class A or higher gains the ability to pass on their will, an inherited ability, either to their offspring or to a person they are bound to. Arthur listened closely as Virian continued. I won't ask how you came into possession of such a powerful beast will. But right now, that power is doing more harm than good. It's too strong for your immature body to handle. Wait, Arthur said. You know all this, do you have a beast will too? Virian smiled. I'm what's known as a beast tamer, a title earned only after fully conquering a beast will. And you can earn that title too, if you learn to control the one inside you. Arthur's throat went dry. I understand how badly you want to return to your family, Virian continued. But if you go now, it'll come at a grave cost. The power you've received is too potent. If it isn't properly controlled soon. A vision flashed in Arthur's mind, a jagged crack running down a monstrous beak. That power will destroy your body from the inside out. Arthur was sleeping on the bed, his mind restless even in slumber as he wondered about the heavy sensation pressing down on his body. A demon was haunting him. He questioned whether this monster was the personification of his worries, his burdens, the expectations placed on him, now invading his dreams. Suddenly, Tessia jumped on him, cheerfully greeting him with a sing-song voice, telling him good morning and playfully calling him to wake up. Arthur, still deeply asleep, mumbled that not now, shadow monster, just 5 more minutes. Tessia, now annoyed, demanded to know who he was calling a monster. She scoffed at his messy hair, mocking that he had no room to talk, calling him a mini Medusa. Then she asked if it was true they were going to stay here. Grandpa had apparently told her this morning that they were. Arthur, while buttoning his shirt, replied that maybe, but they would know for sure after the trip with Elder Virian, addressing her as princess. Tessie immediately pinched him in frustration and shouted that she was not a princess and warned she would get angry if he kept calling her that. Arthur was momentarily confused, then tried to calm her down, telling her to let him shower and get ready, unless she wanted to watch, in which case he suggested she leave the room. Tessia gasped and called him perverted, muttering that Grandpa was right about him. Arthur grew irritated and told her to stop using words she barely understood. He stepped down the stairs and overheard a heated conversation. Someone was pleading, saying, "Please, Father. He knows it is not appropriate for a human to be residing within this kingdom." The queen agreed and told Elder Virian that Alduin was right. She expressed her gratitude to the boy for saving Tessia, but added that allowing a human to stay went against all their traditions. King Virian responded that he had taken a liking to the brat and that there was no need for further discussion. He noted that her daughter seemed to approve of his decisions as well. King Alduin implored his father to reconsider, but Virian replied coldly that the boy would be under his direct guidance and instructed that everyone in the kingdom be informed. Arthur thought that it looked like the elder really could be trusted. As he approached the royal carriage, Elder Virian called out that he was late and urged the little brat to hurry. Arthur and Tessie sat together inside the carriage while Virian occupied the opposite couch. Arthur leaned forward and asked how much longer they had left to travel, calling him Gramps. Elder Virian looked at him, puzzled, and remarked how comfortable Arthur seemed to be with him now. Arthur grinned and said they would have to see how the day went with his mysterious friend. Tessie dozed off, her head resting softly on Arthur's shoulder. Virian, watching them, said that she had woken up very early that morning, pestering him about Arthur, asking if that was right. He gently patted her head, reflecting that being the only princess of the kingdom had caused her to grow up in a lonely environment. She had been hurt too many times by both adults and children pretending to be her friends, which led her to grow cold and distant, constantly building walls around herself. Yet, in the short time she had spent with Arthur, she had smiled and laughed more than she had in the past few years, and for that, he offered a heartfelt thank you. Arthur, however, was thoroughly confused. A sudden creaking sound signaled the carriage had stopped. Tessie stirred from her deep sleep, rubbing her eyes and asking if they had arrived. A servant opened the door of the royal carriage. As they stepped out together, Arthur noticed a quaint and quirky little door standing before them. He thought to himself that he wondered who this mysterious friend could be, someone important enough to make the former king travel all the way to such a remote area. Elder Virion approached the door and kicked it forcefully, calling out that they had arrived and demanding the old witch come out. Arthur stood perplexed while Tessie giggled at the scene. The door swung open and an elderly woman with long curly hair and a wrinkled face appeared. Her expression immediately conveyed a cranky temperament. She snapped that her ears still worked fine, calling him a grouch. King Virion pointed at her and introduced her to Arthur as Rinia Darkasan, an old friend and a very special deviant who could help him. Arthur respectfully bowed and greeted her as elderly Rinia. She briskly told them they did not have all day and ordered them to stop standing around outside and come in. Arthur considered that being a deviant meant she was like Tessia's mother, whose magic did not fall into the 4 basic elemental categories. Inside the house, a large number of books covered the table, and Arthur wondered how exactly she would be able to help. Still confused, he politely asked her to forgive him if he sounded impatient, but explained that Gramps had said her magic could help him reach his parents. Rinia scoffed at the mention of Gramps and teased that she could see Virion had a soft spot for the boy. She explained that she was what was called a diviner. This kind of magic differed greatly from mage to mage, but she was quite capable. She added that there was very little someone could hide from her if she chose to look. For instance, she already knew Arthur was special. So special, in fact, that there were parts of his life even she could not see. Her eyes lit up with swirling colors, showing that these eyes had glimpsed both his past and his future. But that was not why he had come. He was not here for her clairvoyant powers. He was here to see his parents and to let them know he was alive. Arthur confirmed that was correct. Rinia smiled, holding a bowl of water in her hands. She instructed him to lean forward and keep his eyes fixed on the basin. She placed her hand gently on Arthur's head, channeling her magic, and told him to concentrate on the image of his parents, as clearly and in as much detail as possible. Once he could see them in the water, he would be able to speak with them. Arthur closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw his mother, her glowing auburn hair and sun-kissed complexion radiating gentle warmth. Her thin brows were always drawn together in worry over him. Then came the image of his father, with his strong blue gaze and goofy smile that had the power to brighten even the dullest days. His light-hearted jokes and simple nature at home stood in stark contrast to the charisma he displayed as a leader and a fighter. Arthur silently begged for them to be alive. He peeked with one eye, then opened both and stared into the basin, perplexed by what he saw. Alice cooked the food with great care and served that hot, boiling meal at the dining table. She asked everyone to dig in. Ray was amazed to see the meal and made a full spoon bite. He said that this beef stew looked amazing and asked Alice what the special occasion was. She became gloomy and replied in a low tone that there was nothing like that. It had just been a while since she had cooked for him after moving here. Ray gently helped Alice sit down on the chair. Her eyes filled with tears as she thought that this used to be Arthur's and his favorite dish. Ray, noticing the change in her, also felt grieved and asked softly what was wrong, addressing her as Honey. She replied that it was nothing and exhaled deeply, trying to release the stress or the kind of glitch in her heart. She touched her belly gently and then suddenly said, "Hi Mom, hi Dad." Ree froze in that moment just before taking another bite. They both looked at each other in confusion, their eyes wide with disbelief. It was him, their son, Arthur. The full spoonful fell from Ray's hand as they remained locked in a state of shock and wonder. The spoon hit the table and food scattered everywhere. They were probably really surprised that they were hearing his voice inside their heads. Arthur reassured them that he would explain everything later, but for now, he just wanted them to know that he was alive and safe. He told them he had barely managed to survive the fall off the cliff. Jasmine and the other fellows had held Alice up to support her emotionally when Arthur fell. Ray had killed that heinous enemy afterward. He had been overwhelmed with emotion at the time, and had wept out loud while Adam held him during that difficult moment. Arthur told them that this should be kept a secret, but currently he was staying in the kingdom of Eleanor with the elves. He knew it must have been incredibly hard for them. It had been just as hard for him too, but he was glad they were both okay. He hoped they did not blame each other for what had happened. After losing Arthur, Ray had been deeply disturbed. Still, Arthur said he was proud of what Ray did back then, and if he could go back in time he would do it again, even if it meant he would die. Ray had made huge efforts to calm Alice down after that painful incident. Arthur expressed that he wished he could come to them, but that might be a little difficult at the moment. It seemed he had a kind of illness that needed treatment. He assured them he was not in any danger, but he needed to be treated before he could head back home. He also wasn't sure when he would be able to reach out like this again. Meanwhile, Ray and Alice managed to reach another place. Arthur continued speaking to them in their minds. He mentioned there was a mage there who was a deviant like her, his mom. She was the one allowing them to hear his voice. Upon entering the building, Alice and Ree were welcomed in the best manner possible. Arthur then spoke to his dad, saying he would continue practicing magic and fighting while he recovered. He added that they should not be surprised if he could beat them in a match the next time they met. Until then, he told them to keep Mom and the baby safe. Alice and Ree were sitting on the couch, both crying and visibly worried. Arthur spoke again in their heads, telling them that he loved both of them. Ray stood up hurriedly, overcome with emotion, and Alice rushed toward him. Ray gently told her to slow down, addressing her sweetly. They hugged each other tightly, and tears of happiness rolled down their cheeks. Arthur told them to take care until he returned. As he watched their reflection in the water bowl, seeing his parents waiting for him desperately, tears also rolled down his cheeks and fell into the water bowl drop by drop. Arthur then looked at Virion and told him that he was ready. Arthur returned with elderly Virion to the kingdom from Rinia. King Alduin and the queen were standing at the threshold just to welcome them. As Arthur stepped forward to enter the kingdom, King Alduin stopped him. The king said that it seemed years of ruling as a monarch had made him a bit old-fashioned and stubborn. The queen gently tapped his shoulder and clarified that what he meant to say was that they were sorry for earlier. She asked Arthur to please accept their apology and consider this place his own. The king added that Arthur was his daughter's savior and his father's very first disciple, and it was only right that he welcomed Arthur once again, this time properly. Arthur felt a deep sense of happiness. The king leaned forward and extended his hand to shake Arthur's, and Arthur thanked him for his generosity. At that moment, Teshi appeared to defend Arthur. She stepped in front of him and asked the king to hold on. If he was truly sorry to Arthur, then he should let them go outside and play. She wanted to show Arthur around the city. Later, Arthur was sitting on the stairs when Teshi appeared once again and told him she was ready. She looked stunning in a beautiful dress and was wearing a mesmerizing pink hat adorned with a flower. She took him by the hand and guided him through the bustling city streets. While they were exploring, Arthur accidentally bumped into someone. The girl recoiled and exclaimed that it was Gross, claiming she had gotten human germs on her. She mocked that just because Elder Virion seemed to favor him a little, he thought he belonged here. Some other children gathered around. One of them told Arthur to go back to where he came from, calling him a monkey. Tessie became visibly furious and told Arthur to come on, suggesting they just leave. Arthur appeared a little disappointed. He thought to himself that this blatantly glitchy side character was the kind he kind of wanted to mess with. The boy, in a mocking tone, addressed Teshi as the princess and said that while he applauded her kindness, it was beneath her level to be spending time with a human commoner. He offered to escort the princess himself and introduced himself as Faerith Ivsar Tudu. Arthur gasped and repeated his name, surprised that it was the Faerith Ivisar. Teshi looked confused. Faerith boasted that of course Arthur had heard of him, given that he had awakened recently while still so young. He suddenly lost his temper and shouted, demanding to know what Arthur had just called him, correcting the pronunciation to Ivisair and calling him an ignorant fool. Arthur responded with mock seriousness, saying indeed ignorant. He bent forward slightly in a dramatic gesture and sarcastically said he had no idea he was in the presence of such an inspiring genius. He promised that this bug would remember to show proper respect. Teshi chuckled softly. Arthur added that now, if he would excuse them. Faerith called after them to stop, saying he suspected Arthur had not seen through his sarcasm. Arthur thought to himself that perhaps Faerith was not quite as dense as he had assumed. Faerith declared loudly that for the pride of the Ivsar house, he challenged Arthur to a duel. The small girls with him became nervous. Arthur was stunned and thought to himself what an absurd and strange situation this was. Teshi stepped in front of Arthur and questioned how Faerith dared initiate a duel with the disciple of Elder Virion. She acknowledged that while he might be of noble blood, he should still know his place. Faerith and his companions appeared embarrassed and apologized to the princess, but Faerith insisted that his father had taught him never to let anyone trample on his pride. He pointed his stick at Arthur and called him human, demanding he accept the duel or retreat with his primate tail between his legs. He warned that Arthur's decision would also reflect upon his mentor. Arthur wondered whether duels were taken so seriously in this place. Faerith interpreted his silence as acceptance and requested the princess, Tessie, to officiate the duel. Tessia raised her hand in the air and, with her eyes closed, solemnly declared that the duel would begin. People from the market began to gather, eager to watch the duel unfold. Faerith jumped with joy and told Arthur to prepare himself, declaring that this genius would now demonstrate his power. Arthur leapt into the air with a determined expression, but he stumbled and, unable to maintain his balance, fell awkwardly. Arthur asked aloud if that was it. Tessia thought to herself that she had known this was going to happen. She grabbed Arthur's wrist and urged him to run. Arthur, even in the chaos, couldn't help but grow to appreciate this little princess more and more. Although the rest of the day did not out to be as enjoyable as wrestling with Faerith, they eventually made their way to the library. The quiet atmosphere was refreshing and helped him take his mind off things. He sat down and began to read a book. Meanwhile, a vendor in the market cast a disapproving glance at Arthur. Tessia saw the look and approached with an angry expression, ready to protect Arthur. She asked him if his training was starting tomorrow and whether he was feeling nervous. Elderly Virion addressed Arthur, saying that he wasn't sure how Arthur had been taught so far, but he could assure him that his lessons would not be easy. He told him to never mind the pain from his mana core, explaining that the assimilation process used by beast tamers was often compared to submerging one's body in boiling tar. He reminded Arthur that he would be stuck here in a foreign land without the comfort of family and that even daily life would become arduous. He gently patted Arthur's head and added that if he could endure it, the payoff would be enormous. He asked Arthur whether he was up for the challenge, calling him brat. Arthur replied that he was excited. He said he had come a long way to get to where he was now and that he was looking forward to the training, to seeing his parents again, and to everything else that lay ahead. He could not wait to discover what the future had in store for him. Now it is a time 3 years later. Teshi and Arthur have both grown up. Teshi called Arthur and told him they were going to be. She grabbed his ankle, twisted it, and squeezed it back. He said to stop, that he gives. She had actually used mana to twist his ankle. Could she not find a gentler way to wake him up? Teshi said it was not her fault he did not wake up when she asked nicely. Besides, he should feel grateful that such a pretty girl like her was waking him up. He mocked her by saying he found the maids here plenty pretty. Teshi asked if he had said something. She inquired whether he thought the maid just now was pretty. Arthur replied by telling her to get a rest. Elderly Virion asked in a stern way what took them so long. He was holding a stick. He asked that they be made ready for their lesson. There exist 4 basic elements in their higher forms. These higher elements, ice, gravity, lightning, and sound, can only be controlled by a mage who has gone beyond mastery of their foundational elements. They are called deviants. Dwarves can only manipulate earth and or fire, but like elves, they possess a much higher affinity to these 2 elements. Their distinct trait lies in the fact that all dwarves can mold and bend metal, while talented dwarves can control fire and earth to such a high degree that they are able to conjure and manipulate magma. Elves are limited to water, wind, and earth elements but with much higher affinity than humans. In rare cases, elves can also produce a special deviant type capable of controlling plants. However, elves are not able to produce mages that can manipulate the higher forms of water, wind, and earth. Human mages possess the ability to manipulate any of the 4 basic elements. They are also the only race capable of producing deviants in any of those elements, along with anomalies that cannot be categorized into any of the elements, like emitters and healers, for example. There exists a subtle power balance between the 3 races when taking into account population, overall inherent affinity to elements, and diversity in mages. Arthur asked whether that explanation was good enough. The elderly man stabbed his sword into the ground and, after ruminating, said that it was passable. Teshi got tired and lay down on the ground. Teshi asked a question. She knew that this whole assimilation process thing was meant to get Arthur's body ready to handle his beast will, but would it not be better to have him train his body physically, while using magic, like she did? Arthur thought that he had been doing so all along from his lessons beforehand, but the difference in races had really shown over these 3 years. While humans were considered talented if they awakened in their late preteen years, it was not surprising for elven children to awaken as early as 10. For Teshi it had happened even earlier at the tender age of 9. Virion asked why she was angry that she was the only one getting beat up while training. Since then, she had been training her conjuring skills with a tutor while learning to fight from her grandfather. She sat down with a wand on her hand and said that Grandpa needed to go easier. Looking at Tesha, Arthur thought that she was going to be quite the monster in the future, though he should not be the one to talk. Grandpa said that what Arthur had been doing these 3 years was basically fusing his bones, muscles, and organs with his mana. He had not been physically training like her, little one, but he assured that once it was over, his body would be stronger and more resilient than that of a veteran warrior. She asked really and chuckled, saying that then how come he was so sensitive when she hit him. Arthur shrieked because he was being mocked. He said that he still felt pain, she knew. Virion said that it seemed like 3 years of fusion had not been enough to sap away his energy. Was he ready? Good. After today he would be a true beast tamer, unlike those lucky adventurers who merely used their beast will like a tool. Virion gathered some kind of magical energy in his hand and tapped that energy onto Arthur's chest. He said he was going to ignite his body mana core by inserting a large amount of his own mana. Arthur would feel a bit warm, but it should not be too bad. Arthur felt something heavy pressing against his body and there was a boom of lightning that entered him. The energy thrust threw him away. Elderly Virion and Teshia were stunned observing the whole scenario. Virion asked what in the world. Teshi called him and asked if he was okay. He was lying far away. Arthur told them he was fine. He thought. Virion said he knew Arthur had his reasons for not telling him until now, but he had to ask one more time. What sort of beast had given its will to him? Arthur replied that she was a dragon. Arthur was stunned and he was reassured by Virion saying dragon, dear lord, a real dragon tamer. He had trained an actual dragon. Arthur was on the bed when Virion got there to ask how he was feeling. Arthur said he thought he should be asking him that. The last thing he remembered before falling unconscious was going crazy. Elderly Virion coughed and said that he had calmed down. Arthur asked if he could trust these guys to keep it a secret even after he left. Of course, and on the topic of leaving, the date of his departure had just been set for 4 months from now. Listening to this, Arthur moved the blanket away and asked in an awful tone whether he was serious. He had thought it would not be for another 2 years. Elderly Virion said that an interracial tournament among the 3 kingdoms' youths that had been in the works had finally been confirmed. The portals in Cyrus City of Sapin would be open to both Eleanor Kingdom and the Kingdom of Darv during that time. He got excited, and in the very next moment he asked whether that was why Tessia was not here, so that he could be told this. Elderly Virion asked him not to worry about Tessia. He knew Arthur had been checking in on them these past few years through Rinya, but he would finally be able to see them in person. Arthur said in a disappointed manner that still, 4 months was pretty soon. King Virion rubbed his head and said that he would make him wish those 4 months were over soon, brat. Now that he had finished his assimilation, his training would get even harder. He asked Arthur to get some rest. He would break it to Tessia gently. Arthur was worried that 4 months was only so little time. An oval-shaped object dropped onto the floor and it cracked. He got worried when he saw Sylvia's stone fall, and he was confused about how it broke off. Unfortunately, a crack had formed across its surface. From within the crack, something shone faintly, catching his attention. He stared in disbelief as he realized that Sylvia's stone was actually an egg. From the split shell, a small dragon with a tiny tail slowly emerged, its eyes blinking open to the world for the first time. Arthur looked at the creature with warmth and wonder, his gaze soft as he asked, in a mix of awe and affection, if it was truly a dragon. With gentle hands, he patted the small dragon lovingly. In an unexpected reaction, the creature lunged and bit Arthur on the arm. He shrieked in pain as a bruise began to form where the dragon's small teeth had sunk in. The little dragon, meanwhile, was under the impression that Arthur was its mother. Arthur, bewildered by the surreal events unfolding before him, tried to make sense of the situation. After a short while, he discovered that the dragon could speak to him inside his mind. Processing this revelation, Arthur responded that since he was a boy, he should at least be referred to as Papa. Thinking aloud, he mused that perhaps he would name the dragon Sylvie, after his mother. The little dragon seemed to like the name, and Arthur felt it clearly, a rush of emotion and connection flowing from the creature to him. Surprised by the bond, he asked in amazement if the dragon really liked the name, and he could feel the affirmative answer echoing through his mind. As he examined the bite mark again, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than a simple wound. It radiated a strange energy, something that felt like a deep connection between him and Sylvie. At only 8 years old, Arthur now had what looked like a tattoo and had become, in a strange and magical way, a father. He thought to himself that he really was a rebel. That night, he fell asleep beside the little dragon. In the middle of the night, he jolted awake in fear and called out, asking who was there. He saw Tessia standing nearby, holding the little dragon in her arms, her face a mixture of curiosity and surprise. She asked who the creature was, and the little dragon whimpered in distress, crying for Papa to help. Tessia, taken aback, remarked on how cute the dragon was. Embarrassed, Arthur quickly pulled the blanket over his body to cover himself. The next morning, Tessia approached him and asked if he could really communicate with Sylvie through his mind. She commented that he was lucky. Perhaps, she suggested, if Sylvie could communicate with her too, the dragon might like her. Arthur replied that Sylvie probably would like her if she stopped staring at her like she was some kind of predator. Tessia turned toward the elderly Virion and called him over, telling him to come see Arthur's new pet. Virion approached with a doubtful look in his eyes, his gaze settling on the dragon with suspicion. As if on cue, the little dragon leapt up and landed on Arthur's head. Virion grumbled, calling Arthur a brat and muttering that if he kept getting shocked like this, he was going to die young. After Arthur explained everything to Virion, detailing how the egg had cracked and Sylvie had emerged, Virion shared that dragons like Sylvie typically hatched in the presence of their kin. While Tessia and Virion moved on to a sparring session nearby, Arthur sat and watched, his mind occupied with thoughts. They all tried to piece together why Sylvie had hatched in front of Arthur of all people. The only explanation that made sense was that he had fully activated Sylvia's will the previous day, something that might have triggered the hatching. Arthur then asked Virion if he thought he would need to hide Sylvie once he returned to the outside world. Since most people would not know how powerful she truly was, perhaps he could just pass her off as a rare mana beast. King Virion agreed, saying that Arthur should be fine if he played it off that way. He placed a hand firmly on Arthur's shoulder and added that there were more pressing matters at hand. During the assimilation process, they had deliberately held back on strengthening Arthur's mana core. Now that he had fully awakened, it was time to start training both his core and the newly emerged dragon will. Arthur asked what he needed to do next. Virion grinned and explained that in his experience, the best way to access the first stage of a beast will, while also enhancing one's mana core, was through constant combat. Arthur chuckled at the advice and admitted that it made sense. Virion then proposed that it would also make sense for him to fight another beast tamer, someone who could use these will stages against him, as that would help him progress even more quickly. As if summoned by the conversation itself, the roar of a beast echoed nearby. Virion turned to Arthur and suggested they let the battle begin. Beast tamers, mages capable of harnessing the unique abilities inherited from a mana beast, possess powers beyond ordinary comprehension. The first stage, known as the acquire phase, is when a beast tamer can borrow their beast's inherent strengths, but it is only at the second stage, the integrate phase, that a mage can truly utilize the beast's unique abilities and characteristics. For Virion, who had only unlocked this second stage after decades of studying his beast will. The time had finally come when he could wield the deadly prowess of a shadow panther. "Now Arthur, pay attention while he sneaks up behind you," Arthur thought, his mood clouded by irritation, wondering if Virion was seriously claiming he could sneak up on him even after announcing it. The demon-like figure swirled with such speed that he vanished within the blink of an eye, only to reappear a heartbeat later as he tapped Arthur on the shoulder from behind. Arthur spun around quickly but was still a moment too slow to react. Gulping nervously, Arthur admitted defeat, saying he surrendered, unable to even register Virion's speed at his current level, and frankly, that form was nothing short of trauma-inducing. Virion calmly replied that he had been told that before. It was not without its flaws, however, as using the integrate phase still drained him to a degree. Arthur acknowledged that while Virion's movements were astonishing, what truly unnerved him was how even when standing right behind him, he could not feel his presence. Drawing his sword, Virion explained that shadow panthers instinctively manipulate wind and sound, creating the illusion of vanishing altogether. After a brief pause, Virion declared that he believed he had bullied Arthur enough and extended his sword toward him, asking with a faint smile if it was time they began training in earnest. Days began to pass swiftly for Arthur, who found himself completely immersed in rigorous training. Under Virion's watchful guidance and through his own growing insights, Arthur succeeded in accessing the first stage of his dragon's will. Meditation sessions with Tessia became a regular part of his routine, grounding his spirit and honing his control. Virion also taught Arthur how to suppress the presence of his beast will in front of other mages, an essential skill for maintaining the element of surprise. When not strengthening his mana core or delving into the mysteries of Sylvia's dragon will, Arthur could be found sparring against Virion, each duel pushing him to the limits of his endurance. Fortunately, the assimilation process his body had undergone allowed him to keep up with the intense physical and magical conditioning without collapse. In his rare moments of respite, he embraced the simple joys and innocence of childhood, honoring Sylvia's wish that he not grow up too fast. Eventually, the day of his departure arrived. Tessie, overwhelmed with emotion, struggled to keep her composure. Having spent every day together over the past few years, it was heartbreaking for her to face the reality of his imminent journey. Just as he expected, Grandma Sylvia's feather worked brilliantly at concealing Sylvie's mark. As Arthur stood there, Virion gently tapped his shoulder. Little Tessia, emotional and unwilling to say goodbye, had been hiding behind her grandfather. Virion told Arthur that it was time to go. Tessia whispered that his carriage was waiting. Handing over a small medal adorned with the Aerolith house crest, Virion explained that it would help him navigate through the forest. Arthur gave his thanks to his grandpa, only for Virion to remark with mock sarcasm that Arthur could always find another princess to lead him back should he get lost. Already on the verge of tears, Tessia reached out and tugged her grandfather's beard in frustration. Virion winced, rubbing his chin and reminding her that it was only a joke, just a harmless joke. Arthur looked at Tessia and promised that they would meet again soon. With Gramps as her teacher, he expected her to be stronger than him the next time they crossed paths. They hugged tightly, a silent farewell passing between them. Arthur whispered that he was going to miss her and urged her to stay safe. Tessia broke into sobs, unable to contain her feelings, and confessed through her tears that she was going to miss him too, calling him Art with a soft voice. Arthur said his goodbyes and turned toward the waiting carriage. As he climbed aboard, a familiar voice greeted him with mocking disdain. A boy sneered and said, "Well, look who it is, if it is not Arthur the human brat," asking if he had finally been kicked out of the kingdom. Arthur squinted and asked who he was. The boy, clearly agitated, snapped that he was the noble Arthur had humiliated by defying the customs of their duel. According to him, everyone but a foolish human like Arthur knew that a true duel was meant to be a demonstration of magic where the challenger always struck first. Arthur chuckled, recalling the name and guessing, "Ivysaur, right?" The boy screeched in protest, correcting him that he was Ferithufsar Hit-Eye, heir to the noble Ivysaur family. He admitted he may have been defeated unfairly when he was a naive child, but challenged Arthur with the implication that things would be different now. Yet instead of escalating the tension, Arthur offered his hand and they shook. Arthur smiled and said it was nice to see him again and apologized for bullying him back then. Another voice chimed in, suggesting Arthur could call Ferith by the nickname Fafi, as everyone else did. Ferith immediately exploded with anger, demanding that they not say that in front of Arthur. Eventually they all settled in for the journey, taking time to rest together. The carriage carrier then announced that they had arrived. Arthur leaned out of the carriage window to catch his first glimpse of the destination. They were finally here. This was the place his mother and father had spoken of with such pride and excitement. This was the legendary floating city of Cyrus. Everyone in the bustling market was chattering, their voices blending into a symphony of daily life as the carriage came to a halt in front of the building. Arthur stepped down and took a deep breath before climbing the worn stone stairs. He knocked on the door with a quiet confidence, yet inside his heart pounded louder than any battlefield. He called out softly, announcing that they were finally home, asking if Sylvie was ready. The weight of what he had endured pressed on him. He had nearly died, he had lost someone irreplaceable, he had taken lives and trained harder than most would believe, Yet none of those things rattled his nerves as much as this very moment. From within the house, a little girl's voice rang out, saying she was coming. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman who peered up at him with kind curiosity and asked if she could help him. Arthur bowed respectfully and introduced himself, his voice steady as he said his name was Arthur Leywin and that he had been informed his family was currently residing in this manor. The name struck a chord inside, and from the side, a small girl peeked around and asked who Leywin was. Just then Alice emerged balancing a food bowl in her hands and answered that it was Eleanor Leywin, right there, and reminded her of what she had said about greeting anyone who knocked on their door. But upon recognizing the face before her, she froze in disbelief. The bowl slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Her voice trembled as she repeated the name Eleanor Leywin, his sister. Arthur tried to speak but emotion overtook him. Wait, before that. Tears welled in his eyes and spilled down his cheeks, warm and unrestrained. He smiled through the blur and greeted his mother, telling her that he was home. Alice rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him, pulling him close in a tight embrace as she too began to weep, saying that she had known that voice was truly his. Yes, he was back now. Her baby was finally home. Little Leaner started sobbing as well, asking their mother not to cry. A voice called from within the house, growing closer, more frantic, until Ray rushed inside, shouting that it was his son, Arthur, his son. He threw his arms around Arthur, tears streaking his cheeks as he held him tightly. Together, the three of them sat on the couch, a fragile peace settling in. Alice, brushing her eyes, asked how he was feeling and if his voice was all right. He had told them before about an illness. Was it fully treated now? She fretted over how thin he looked and whether he had been eating 3 meals a day. Arthur reassured her gently, telling her he was fine and that he had never been better. Ree chuckled and told his wife she was asking too many questions at once. Besides, with just one look she could see how big and strong their son had become. That was right. Alice then turned to Eleanor and called her over, asking her to come say hi to her elder brother. The little girl stood frozen for a moment, wide-eyed, then tumbled down from the couch and blinked in astonishment. Big brother. Alice smiled and said that this was the same brother from the stories Mommy and Daddy told her before bedtime. Eleanor ran forward and greeted him in a soft, loving tone. Arthur crouched and greeted her back, saying that it was nice to finally meet his sister. After they had all calmed down, Arthur began to explain everything from the beginning. Though he trusted them deeply, he chose to leave out any mention of Sylvia, instead describing his survival from the cliff fall as a miraculous combination of luck and his body instinctively using magic to protect him. He continued by telling them about how he found Tessia and spent time in the kingdom of Eleanor recovering. Ree leaned in and asked about his little companion. Arthur explained that while he was traveling, he stumbled upon a mana-beast den where Sylvie's mother was dying from a grave injury. He had not been able to save the mother, but he had taken care of Sylvie since that day. Alice, still concerned, asked if he was sure that he was completely healed now and if there was any chance the illness might return. Arthur reassured her again, saying she did not need to worry anymore, that it had mostly been due to the instability of his mana core caused by awakening too early. He admitted he felt guilty for keeping secrets from them, but until he became stronger, it was too dangerous for them to know everything. Ray clenched his fist with pride and asked about his mana core. What stage was he at now? Alice scolded him gently, saying that their son had just come home and he was already grilling him about mana core stages. Ray protested that there was nothing wrong with comparing growth, especially since he had been working as the instructor for the Helsty auction house guards ever since they had settled here. Arthur smirked and asked if it was only his father's facial hair that had grown. What stage was Ray at now? Ray laughed and said that this old man had broken through 2 years ago and entered the dark orange stage. He thought it was obvious he had bulked up, but now to think his son had already broken through into the next stage. Arthur nodded and said he must have worked really hard. Ray leaned in and asked, impressed, what about him? What stage had Arthur reached? Arthur replied that he was light red now. Ray froze, repeating the words, light red. He muttered a curse in disbelief before catching himself. Alice, startled, told him that it was amazing, but also reminded him about what she had said regarding cursing in front of Ellie. Ray quickly turned to his daughter and told her not to say that word. Then he turned back to Arthur and asked again if he was really at light red. When did it happen? How? Actually, never mind. They were going to the backyard to spar right now. Alice and Arthur laughed at the sudden challenge. Arthur replied that it was good to be back. A man rushed into the house, breathless, his voice rising as he called out Ray's name and asked if it was true that his son was alive. He adjusted his glasses hastily, trying to process the scene before him, asking aloud what in the world was going on. With him were a woman and a girl who seemed about Arthur's age. Arthur looked at them and immediately understood that these were the people who had been taking care of his family in his absence. Ree smiled warmly and welcomed them, addressing the man and woman by name. Vincent, Tabitha, he said he wanted them to meet his son Arthur. He really was back. Vincent nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on Arthur, and said that he could see that. Ray then turned to Arthur and explained that this was Vincent Helsty, the man who ran the Helstia auction house and an old friend whom he now worked for. This was his house, and before they started wrecking it, Arthur should introduce himself. Arthur bowed politely, his voice steady as he said it was a pleasure to meet them both, addressing them as Mr. and Mrs. Helsty. He added that he understood this might come as a surprise, but he had asked them not to tell anyone about his survival, and for that, he sincerely apologized for the confusion. Vincent chuckled and remarked if Arthur was really sure he was related to Ray. Arthur smiled and said he got asked that a lot, but yes, he was. Miss Helsty welcomed him warmly, saying it was great to have him in their home. She introduced the girl beside her as Lilia, noting that she was about his age and hoped the two of them would become friends. Arthur and Lilia greeted each other, and she was instantly fascinated by Sylvie, asking if she could touch his pet. Vincent, shifting focus, asked about the earlier comment on wrecking his house. Ray responded that it was true. Arthur and he had been just about to go to the backyard for some sparring. Vincent raised an eyebrow and asked with surprise if they were seriously going to spar. Both women exchanged glances and said a few words quietly as Ray and Arthur took their positions facing each other in the yard. Meanwhile, Lily and Eleanor ran around chasing Sylvie, laughing as they tried to keep up with the nimble mana beast. Vincent turned to Alice with disbelief, questioning whether Ray could possibly be serious about Arthur being a light red core mage. Mrs. Helsty asked her husband to calm down and sit. Alice admitted she had been surprised too, but Arthur had always been a fast learner, and he had no reason to lie about something like this. Vincent shook his head and said that he was just supposed to believe that an 8-year-old had not only awakened but progressed through 3 stages already. Even the arrogant geniuses accepted into Cirrus Academy, most of whom were 11 or 12, were only at the dark red stage. Arthur, overhearing that perhaps it was better not to tell Mr. Helsty that he had already reached light red, especially since he had not even been able to train his core properly while it was assimilating with Sylvie's beast will. Ray looked over and said once more that he hoped Arthur was ready. His father was no longer the same man he used to be. Arthur clenched his fist and replied that neither was he. The spar began swiftly, both attacking and defending in a blur of motion. Ray grinned and told him he was going to have to try harder than that. Arthur stepped in, grabbed his father's shirt, and used his momentum to push him forward, tapping him down cleanly. He asked what his father thought of that. Ray admitted it wasn't bad, that Arthur had caught him off guard, but now it was time for his old man to get serious. As his mana flared, Ray gathered fire magic in his hands and said it was a little trick he had learned after breaking through into the dark orange stage. He warned Arthur not to say he hadn't been warned. In this world, from the moment they awakened, mages had elemental affinities, strengths that determined what kind of magic they would be able to control best. Parents often sought out expensive professional testing to determine their child's affinity early on, so they could guide their development along the right path. Conjurers had a natural advantage in being able to manifest and manipulate the element of their affinity, while for augmenters, the presence of elemental affinity was more subtle, and true manifestation typically came only after they reached a certain threshold. For Ray, who had fought and trained since he was young but had never received formal instruction, it had taken until he reached the orange core stage to turn his raw, explosive mana leakage into tangible fire magic. In the world Arthur had come from, elements weren't destined from birth but were chosen by the path a person took, guided by talent and effort. No one was confined to a single affinity, and hard work played just as much of a role as natural ability. For Arthur, who had been blessed with many advantages since arriving in this world, all of that preparation had led to this moment. He had learned a few tricks of his own. Energy gathered around him, resonating with purpose and strength, and he cautioned everyone not to be too surprised. As they sparred, it became clear to all watching that Ray's punches had grown sharper, and he was leveraging his longer reach with precision, keeping Arthur at a distance. The match intensified, their mana clashing in waves of force and fire. Both Arthur and Ray gathered energy to their fullest, their bodies surrounded by an invisible force as the tension in the air thickened. Vincent was shocked to see Arthur's deviant for the first time, the sheer intensity of it catching him off guard, and the others around them stood in awe, equally amazed by the manifestation. It was indeed a deviant, clear and unmistakable. Without hesitation, Arthur launched a sudden attack on Ray, who immediately placed a defense in anticipation. Both of them now had to reveal the extent of their energy, no longer able to hold back as they engaged each other with calculated aggression. They tried hard to block each other's attacks, matching blow for blow, push for push, the clash growing more intense with every second. As expected of his father, Arthur noticed Ray's punches were getting sharper, more precise, and Ray was cleverly leveraging his longer reach, keeping Arthur from getting too close, frustrating his attempts to land a clean hit. With a sudden movement, Arthur managed to entangle his leg around Ray's, disrupting his balance, and then delivered a powerful punch straight to Ray's chin with such force that Alice, who had been watching carefully, gasped in shock at the impact. In the next instant, Ray recovered and locked Arthur in a grapple, holding him firmly, and with a proud smile, he said that it was quite a trick he had learned. Lightning had proven to be Arthur's most successful deviant affinity so far, sparking and crackling with energy around him, but he knew deep down he still had a long way to go. His attempts with ice were still unstable and unreliable, prone to shattering or dispersing before forming fully. and he hadn't yet even managed to unlock the affinities of sound or gravity, both of which remained out of reach. In the midst of the fight, a memory flashed across Arthur's mind, a punch from Virion that had landed on his cheek with such force it left a lasting impression, both physically and mentally, but despite the pain, he had to admit it felt good to finally have something worth bragging about to his parents. Ray, still holding Arthur, asked him when he had learned that move, how he had learned it, and what else he knew, his tone a mixture of curiosity and astonishment. Arthur replied that it hadn't been long since he discovered it, and that he could barely control it even now, admitting he couldn't do much else with it yet. At that moment, Ellie ran toward her father, worry evident on her face as she asked if he was okay, while Alice rushed behind her, calling out that she shouldn't run and should be careful. Vincent, overwhelmed by the unfolding events, suddenly felt dizzy and muttered that he needed a drink, still trying to process what he had just witnessed. His wife, watching Arthur with admiration and disbelief, remarked quietly that he was truly an extraordinary child. Meanwhile, the servants arrived at the scene, holding buckets of water in their hands, quickly working to put out the small fires that had started around the area due to the intense exchange of energy between Arthur and Ray, their faces focused and alert as they tried to contain the aftermath of the explosive confrontation. Vincent called Ray while taking a sip from a beautifully carved wooden glass, his voice calm yet edged with curiosity as he asked whether Ray realized what kind of future his son had. Ray, resting a hand gently on Arthur's head, responded with quiet certainty that of course he did, that he had known ever since Arthur awakened when he was just 3 years old. Vincent's wife, startled by the revelation, turned in shock and asked for confirmation, her voice rising as she repeated the words in disbelief, "Awakened at 3. Alice, chuckling, interjected that Arthur had blown up most of their house in the process. Ray laughed at the memory and said those were good times. Ellie, watching closely, asked with concern whether Papa was okay. Vincent, confused and perhaps overwhelmed, held his head for a moment, coughed lightly, and turned to Ray with a question that hovered with both hesitance and hope, asking what if they enrolled Arthur in Sarah's academy. Just then, Ellie leaned in and placed a spoonful of food into her father's mouth. Arthur, hearing the name, thought to himself with curiosity, Sarah's academy, and found himself unsure about what was being discussed. Ray reacted with a tone of disbelief, questioning whether Vincent was serious, reminding him that Arthur was only 8 and that Cyrus Academy was the most prestigious magical institution on the continent. Vincent's wife, still watching the exchange, acknowledged that her slightly tipsy husband might actually have a point, addressing both Ray and Alice by name. She pointed out that with Arthur's level of talent, the academy might even be willing to sponsor him, which would relieve them of the burden of tuition fees. Alice responded with a mix of surprise and humility, saying they couldn't possibly let that happen, not after everything Vincent and his family had already done for them. She insisted that having them pay for their son's schooling was too much, and, besides, Arthur was still only 8 years old. She was certain the academy wouldn't even consider someone his age. Vincent, with a confident smile, boasted that he did quite a bit of business with the famed director of Cyrus Academy herself, and that he could speak to her directly. Arthur, pausing with a bite of food halfway to his mouth, raised his voice to politely interrupt, asking if he might say something since this decision would ultimately affect his future. It was dusk by then, and the stars had begun to glitter faintly across the darkening sky. The servants moved efficiently around them, winding down dinner preparations, and the soft clanking of plates added to the ambience of a home settling into evening. Later that night, Arthur slept peacefully with his small dragon Sylvie curled up beside him, her warm breath a gentle presence as the night deepened. Alice looked on, her voice tinged with emotion, admitting she still couldn't believe he was here with them, grown into such a handsome young boy. Arthur, hearing her, smiled faintly and said he had changed a lot since they had last seen him, hadn't he? Ray responded with a father's steady warmth, saying that no matter how much Arthur had changed, he was still their son. Even after learning that Arthur was a deviant mage with the potential to become one of the strongest mages in the future, that astonishing fact was still only the second best news of the day. Alice agreed with Ray, adding that he was right, although now Arthur was probably too grown up to receive a goodnight kiss from his old mother. Arthur sighed gently and leaned forward to kiss her on the cheek, then turned to Ray and said goodnight to them both, telling them how much he had missed them. Ray nudged Alice and said they should let Arthur get some rest, while Alice, pausing at the door, mentioned almost forgetting to tell him that they planned to go shopping with his sister tomorrow. She explained that he needed new clothes and that it would be a good opportunity for the two of them to bond. Arthur responded with genuine enthusiasm, saying that it sounded good. Ray, before leaving, reminded Arthur not to hold Vincent's earlier excitement against him, saying that he meant well. Arthur nodded and replied respectfully that since he had only just reunited with his family today, he hoped to spend some time with them before making a decision about leaving again to attend the academy. Vincent, a little chastened, agreed and admitted that Arthur was right, that he had gotten a bit ahead of himself. Arthur rose from the dining table and, feeling the fatigue from earlier activities set in, announced that he seemed to be more tired from the sparring than he had expected and politely excused himself. As he walked down the hallway, he heard a girl's voice behind him. Vincent's daughter called out that if he headed in that direction, he would end up in one of their cellars. Arthur stopped momentarily astonished, and turned as she laughed and beckoned him to follow her, saying she knew a better place. She led him into a warmly lit lobby and entered with a cheerful greeting, calling out to everyone and hoping they wouldn't mind a guest today. An older woman looked up and, with a wry smile, remarked that if it wasn't the boy who had burned half of the lawn she had worked so hard to maintain. Arthur chuckled and offered his apologies for the trouble he had caused. A man sipping tea reassured him not to mind the older lady, saying she was just teasing. Arthur thought to himself that she had seemed rather quiet before, but now he guessed this was her true personality. The old lady handed a fork and knife to the girl, who then asked if they had any duck meat left, specifically the fatty parts. The old lady, while serving food, cautioned her to be careful, calling her Lilia, and mentioned that Madame Helstay had grown suspicious because she had been gaining weight recently. Lilia took a bite and replied with mock indignation, telling Maria that she had already warned her not to talk about that and reminded her that she was a healthy growing girl. Laughter rippled around the room at her spirited response. One of the maids leaned toward Arthur and whispered that Lady Lilia often sneaked down here when she was feeling stressed. Arthur turned the thought over in his mind, wondering what exactly she was stressed about. Lilia, catching a hint of the conversation, declared that for that comment, she demanded Maria save her a serving of pork belly next time. A male servant added that the greatest wish of Sir and Madame Helstey was for their daughter to awaken as a mage, even though neither of them was one themselves. Lilia, he said, certainly wanted to be a mage as well, but it was a tremendous amount of pressure for such a young girl. Arthur replied thoughtfully that she need not worry, because he could tell the Helstey family were kind people who meant well. As the night wound down, Alice and Ray said goodnight to their son, their voices soft with affection, and the warmth of family filled the quiet spaces of the house. Arthur was still sleeping when Sylvie began licking his face. Slowly waking up, Arthur picked him up in his hands and raised him high, cheerfully announcing that he was up and asking Sylvie if he was excited too. He then wondered how Tesha might be doing. As he brought Sylvie closer, he sniffed him and recoiled at the unpleasant smell, remarking that it seemed he was not the only one in need of a shower today. He dipped Sylvie into a basin of water with the intention of washing him thoroughly, then placed him gently on the bed to dry off. With a chuckle, Arthur told him that it wasn't that bad. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Arthur called out that he was coming and opened it to find little Ellie standing there. Greeting her warmly with a smile, he said, "Well, hello there, Ellie." She looked either exhausted or slightly annoyed as she responded with a soft "Good morning, brother," and informed him that their mama had asked her to wake him up. Arthur acknowledged this with a nod and asked if Ellie could take him down to see their mother. At this, Ellie's mood brightened instantly, and she excitedly replied that they would eat breakfast and then go shopping. Although her words were slightly slurred due to her young age and inability to pronounce them clearly, she clasped Arthur's hand and hurriedly led him down the stairs. Soon they found themselves in the marketplace, surrounded by the bustling crowd of Cyrus City. The air buzzed with chatter as people negotiated prices and selected items. Arthur was captivated by the sight of the city. Ellie, now holding Sylvie, stayed close as Arthur peered curiously through the window of a nearby building where beautiful, shining stones were displayed in neat rows. Intrigued, he asked what kind of shop this was. Vincent's wife responded, explaining that the small orbs he saw were called beast cores. These magical cores were extracted from mana beasts and used to enhance one's powers, although the effects could vary greatly from core to core. It was, she said, a bit of a gamble to spend hundreds of gold coins on them, but if one were lucky, a core might even contain a beast will. Hundreds of gold, Arthur thought to himself, if not thousands. He considered that he was fine with the beast will he already had, and for that he was grateful. She added that their Helstia auction houses received quite a few beast cores and even infant mana beasts, and Arthur was welcome to take a closer look when the opportunity arose. Arthur thanked her and said that he would appreciate that. At that moment, Lilia tugged at his robe and urged him to follow her. There was a particular place she had been wanting to take him to ever since she saw him. She led him into a hair salon. The stylist was a muscular man with long, meticulously maintained hair that shimmered under the lights. Arthur looked around uncertainly and asked if this was really necessary. Alice, standing nearby, insisted that his hair was atrocious. The hairdresser reassured him confidently, promising to make her son shine like the flawless gem he truly was. Internally, Arthur was screaming in protest. He felt utterly ridiculous. When the styling was done, Alice looked at him with pride and declared that he looked perfect. Little Ellie added that he now looked good enough to be her brother, and Alice chuckled, agreeing that Ellie was right. Arthur finally looked like a civilized man. As they continued walking, Arthur noticed a group of students laughing near a stall. Curious, he asked Lilia who they were. She explained that they were students from Cyrus Academy. Arthur, taken aback, admitted he hadn't realized. Lilia elaborated that wearing that uniform was something of a status symbol around here. Arthur observed them again and said they seemed like jerks to him. Lilia admitted that many of them were, though they were almost treated like royalty in this city. Just then Alice asked what the two were talking about. Lilia casually replied that they were just talking about the school. Suddenly, Sylvie began crawling like a puppy, full of energy and curiosity. Alice watched him fondly and remarked that he was usually so calm and mature. It was refreshing to see him so excited. Miss Vincent chimed in that after the spectacle of the previous night, it was comforting to see him acting more like a normal child. However, the women around him collectively looked disappointed. Later, as Arthur entered another building, a bell above the door rang softly. A stern man behind the counter looked up and asked if he could help him, making it clear that this was no place for children. He asked Arthur to leave while he was still asking nicely, warning him that the item he was looking at was a dangerous weapon. Arthur's eyes were drawn to a beautiful sword. The man chuckled and told him this was not like the toy sword he probably had at home and suggested there was a candy store just outside. Arthur, maintaining his composure, responded as he exited the building, stating that he was well aware of what a sword was and apologized for getting in the way. Just then, a rough hand grabbed his shoulder and a voice demanded to know what kind of house raised such a rude child. Alice immediately interjected, telling the man to get his hand off her son and demanding to know what he thought he was doing. The man identified himself as Agastus and began to explain, but stopped short in shock when he heard the name Halsey. Alice and Ellie were visibly angry while Lilia took the opportunity to mock the man. Madame Halsey arrived and addressed him directly, stating that Agastus was from a branch family of House Ravenport. She asked if they would prefer she revoke his and his family's participation in the Halsey auction house. Realizing the gravity of the situation, they all bowed deeply before Madame Halsey. Agastus begged for forgiveness, claiming he had no idea the child was associated with House Halsey and offered his most sincere apologies. Arthur turned to his family and thanked them for helping him out of that situation. Madame Halsey admitted with a laugh that in truth, she was more afraid of what Arthur might have done to the man. She and Alice shared a laugh over it. Meanwhile, a man wearing a hood observed them from a distance with a suspicious look. Later, they all stepped out of a carriage, arms full of purchased items, and entered the house. Vincent greeted them warmly and commented that they had finally arrived. He called Arthur over, saying there was someone he wanted him to meet. A woman wearing a wide hat turned to face him and greeted him with a kind smile, saying that he must be Arthur. Vincent had told her a great deal about him. She introduced herself as Cynthia Goodsky, the founder and director of Xyrus Academy.